Hey. Good to see you guys again here today. If you were in my class in Group A, I got to see you in person. Group B, people will be coming in, Group C, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, and I remind you that when you're at home, you need to be doing the module lessons that I put there. Okay, this is lesson 2 on the era of good feelings. If you did not do lesson 1 on the era of good feelings, you're going to want to do that because these all build on one another. And again, I remind you that the goal is to help you write the journal entry that is going to be due at the end of the week, so we can discuss it. And the lens that we're going to be looking at this history through is going to be the conflicting ideas of nationalism and sectionalism, these two forces that are like changing our nation as we go. And I want to remind you, grasshoppers, that like the prompt asks you that I want you to write the journal for, right, is asking you how much change is taking place politically and economically as these forces continue to move and shape our young nation. Okay, so the prompt for the journal is in yesterday's module. Okay, so I'm going to use this one to continue the lecture, continue the story on the era of good feelings. If you're in Group B, you'll be in here in person, and we'll get a chance maybe to talk about it in person, but probably not. Let's go to the module then without wasting any more time. I don't want these meetings to take too long. I should say these classes to take too long for this week, because you're already in there. For those of you that are live in person, you're already spending 20 minutes in person, and you got to go do this at home. But like I told my group today, everybody's going to have to do it. So all of you are going to have to at some point be with me on a day and then go home and do one of these lessons on your own. So here we are, October 6th lesson. You'll open that. You're looking at my lecture right now that I obviously didn't embed yet, but I will. And so we're looking at the presidency of James Monroe, 1817 to 1825, reminding you that this is an era of good feelings, and therefore there's only one political party. You go to the polls, you vote Republican or you vote Republican. That's what you got, all right? The Federalists are kaput, except for one man that has any real influence, and that is John Marshall, who is still a Federalist on the Supreme Court. But everybody else, right, like other than that, it's Republicans everywhere, right? And I want to remind you that eventually these Republicans are going to turn into the Democrats, okay? But for now, we're still calling them Republicans. So this map of the United States is a good place for us to start, right? This is what the United States looks like as we begin the era of good feelings. And you can see these states that get added. They were all added piecemeal, as was actually even written up originally in the Articles of Confederation, right? One of the things the Articles did correct is it laid out for the organization of adding new states to the Union. And this territory of the country, known as the Old Northwest Territory, via the Northwest Ordinance under the Articles of Confederation, is now going to be increasingly composed of states that are now being added to the Union. And you can see that, it's primarily the area along the Great Lakes and what we call the Midwest. Missouri is going to eventually come on in, but these are territories, and down here in the South, right, these are going to be added as well. I would like to point out a few things. That Oregon Territory at this point is somewhat disputed between England, us, Spain, and Russia. Believe it or not, Russia had come down from the other direction. So if you follow my cursor here, the Russians had explored across the Bering Sea there and had come all the way down along Canada, along the coast from Alaska, all the way down here to Oregon. So even they're kind of, even the Russians are kind of like checking out the Americas, right? And then all of this is still under possession of Spain. This gray territory was purchased by the Louisiana, right? The Louisiana Purchase that we made from Napoleon in France. So one of the things that hits in early on in the Monroe presidency, you know, he's a Republican, elected as a Republican, and all those things that we talk about, right? Republicans say they believe in power to the states. They say they believe in individual liberties. They say they believe in a narrow interpretation of the Constitution, right? A strict interpretation of the Constitution. And again, a series of challenges are going to come that are going to like put that all, you know, test all those values. Right, so the first challenge I want to talk about is the Panic of 1819. So the journal entry I ask you about, one of the things it asks is economics, right? Economic changes or not over time. Well, the Panic of 1819 is a very real thing. And if you're sitting at home right now watching this video lesson, you repeat after me. Every panic in United States history has been a result of over-speculation, usually by the banks. Also, a lack of regulation does it. It turns out that if you just let capitalism run wild, that it turns out to fail pretty miserably. And the Panic of 1819 is a great example. You know, every time there's a financial panic, it's because of what we call over-speculation. What I mean by that is people want to get rich and they want to get rich quick. And capitalism, one of its benefits is it does allow you to generate a lot of wealth. I mean, that's kind of nice, right? But the thing is that a lot of times people want a shortcut to that wealth. And without regulations in place, those shortcuts lead to disaster. Right? It doesn't matter if you're talking about 1819. It doesn't matter if you're talking about 1929 and the stock market crashed. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about 2008 when the housing market crashed, right? The financial panics, lack of regulation, the banks just doing whatever they want, over speculating, which means to take gambles, okay? Speculation means to gamble, all right? Effectively, that's what it means. And so every financial panic has this area of the economic sector where people are gambling, and they're gambling too much, right? Some of you are familiar that in 2008, that was the housing market. People were gambling in the housing market, trying to flip houses, trying to buy more houses than they could really afford, and using these tools that were in place to do that at the time in 2008 to be irresponsible. In 1929, of course, it had been the irresponsible stock market behavior of Americans that had led to a massive crash in 1929. And we go all the way back to 1819. It's what's the sandbox? Like every financial panic has this sandbox of like gambling that people want to, you know, what's the sandbox? Well, it's not housing. It's not the stock market. This time it's Western land, okay? All of this land out here in gray, because of the Louisiana Purchase, is cheap. The federal government has decided that it's going to offer it at a very cheap price for anybody that wants to go out there and buy it. And Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of this, right? Because, you know, he's the party of the common man. That's how Republicans are billing themselves at this point. The party of the common man. And so we are going to offer land out west cheap so common men can move west and buy it and start farms and ranches and whatever. Problem is that not everybody's got the money to do this. So they take loans out of the bank to do this. And the banks aren't really regulating those loans. They're giving loans out to people that are too much of a risk. And so when people go out west here, settle, a lot of times their settlement attempts fail. And when they fail, they're not able to pay their mortgages or their loans back to the banks. And then the banks start to fail. And then you got a pretty bad situation. The Panic of 1819 is partially a result of all this cheap land out west that nobody's governing really the rules about going out there and buying it and settling it. It's a risky undertaking. And a lot of these banks that finance these trips out west for people to settle are located in the east. And so what do you have? You've got people from the South especially wanting to move west to get more land because the South is starting to run out of good land. Okay, it's all being bought up by plantation types who are cultivating it for slavery and all that stuff. So if you want land, you got to move further west where the soil's not quite as good, right? And people are going out there not really necessarily knowing that, and because they want to be rich too, just like those plantation folks who've owned that land for centuries, going all the way back to Jefferson and Washington and whatnot. So you got Southerners wanting to go west, but a lot of times you got East Coast banks financing that out west. And so when these folks go out there and fail, the banks fail, everybody's pointing fingers, right? And the Panic of 1819 results in a lot of blaming, right? People in the Northeast saying, you know, why can't you, Southerners and Westerners who go out west, why can't you be safer? Why can't you pay your loans back? And then meanwhile, the people that move out west are like to the Northeastern bankers, like, why are you, you know, so stingy with your loans, or why do you ask for them to be paid back you know, rigidly, right? Why are you so willing to foreclose on our properties? Where, you know, don't you know it's hard out there? And there's a lot of finger pointing. Well, I ask you guys, nationalism or sectionalism? What is the Panic of 1819 going to contribute to, especially when you consider the pain and suffering created by it? Okay, it's really the first major financial panic in U.S. history. Okay. Then you got President Jackson's Florida invasion, and once again, I had a photo in here of Andrew Jackson that apparently when I saved it, it didn't work out. So, okay, Andrew Jackson. Let me pull up an Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson as general. You see these images of him, right? So I think like this or something like it was the picture that I had in there. So you got, you know, Andrew Jackson made his name as a general, and he's going to continue to do so. And I'm going to explain to you like what happens here in Florida in 1819. Okay, and you can see that Florida territory at this time, like you know, in 1819 was still part of Spain. Okay, and what happens is what's happening is Native Americans are raiding U.S. settlements along the border here in like Georgia and Alabama, okay, and Mississippi. Like Native Americans, the tribe, especially in the region, was known as the Seminole, and a lot of you guys have, you know, you recognize the Seminoles. Florida State University, the Seminoles, right? And these Seminoles, interestingly enough, were also interracial. A lot of them were Native Americans who ended up having children with runaway slaves from the South. Runaway slaves from the South would escape into the swamps, which is where a lot of these Native American Seminole Indians started to like settle because their land was being taken away by the whites. And so there was interbreeding there. There was like cross-pollination, if you will. And so you see that with the Seminole Indians, the Native Americans there. And they are constantly raiding white settlements along the frontier here as they get pushed out of their land. They're like hit and run from the swamps. And there are people that are arming those Native Americans out of Spanish Florida. We can't fix this as a nation because these hit and runs happen on our soil, but then they retreat back into Florida, which is a foreign country, right? It's not part of the United States at this point. And so this is Spanish territory. And so British agents who have a history of arming Native Americans, for example, they still want to make money, in this process. So they're arming the Native Americans and attacking them. And British agents are also fleeing into Florida territory for protection because they know we can't go in there after them without an act of war. Enter Andrew Jackson. This is where Andrew Jackson makes a name for himself as famous, like Indian fighter. He, after fresh off of his reputation in the Battle of New Orleans, just 4 years prior to this, he's going to contribute in fighting to what will be known as the Seminole Indian Wars during and after this time. It's a series of wars we fight with the Seminole Indians over land rights and such. And Andrew Jackson is going to lead an invasion, an unauthorized invasion into Florida, right? The president of the United States, James Monroe, is not in favor of this excursion into Florida because it's a foreign territory and it could start a war. But Jackson's undaunted. He chases the Seminoles and the British people that are selling them guns into Florida, even so much as going into Pensacola, Florida, and raising the American flag there, which is a total act of war. You're in another country raising a flag, right? Why does he feel like he can do this? Is that nationalism or sectionalism? Think about it, right? Rah, rah, go America. We won the Battle of New Orleans. We fought the British to a standstill. Here we are 4 years later throwing our weight around, and Jackson feeling kind of invincible as the guy who won the Battle of New Orleans, right, back during the War of 1812, is going to lead this excursion. I don't need a declaration of war. I'm just going to do it. And even though he's not being supported by President Monroe is kind of powerless to stop him also because he knows how popular Andrew Jackson is as a folk hero and a general, right? So this kind of shows you how things are getting dicey. And meanwhile, Spain is watching the situation, and what's their response going to be? They could start a war over this. I mean, we are invading their territory. Andrew Jackson is going rogue, okay, when he does this. And I'm going to skip for a minute down here to the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, right? I kind of put this out of order. The Adams-Onis Treaty, Spain actually responds by coming to the bargaining table with us. And they're kind of like, they see the writing on the wall. Like, they're really powerless to do anything about Andrew Jackson's invasion. It doesn't look like the U.S. government is interested in, stopping future invasions of Florida territory. So a deal is drawn up to buy Florida from Spain. And that is known as the Adams-Onis Treaty. It's a purchase of Florida from Spain. So now it can become part of the United States, all right? And the details of this treaty say that we are going to agree to buy Florida for a certain amount, right? Spain will leave it alone, right? Spain also agrees to give up claims to Oregon up here as more and more Americans start heading west towards that area, okay? Spain's going to give up claims to that, but also Spain requires that we don't send any Americans into what is now Mexican territory, right? So this is Spain. This is part of Spanish territory still, and especially in Texas, all right? We're supposed to agree to not send any more settlers into what is now Texas. So that's all part of this deal. Ha, right? How well did Americans do at keeping, especially the Texas side of things? But that gives you a look at what's coming, all right? We're going to buy Florida. And by Florida, we're expanding the size of the United States. You got to think to yourself, nationalism or sectionalism, okay? So it's also going to quickly be determined that Florida is a good place to grow cash crops, thus slaves are needed. Now, the Missouri Compromise. Here we go. Missouri Territory. Enough settlers by 1820 have moved into Missouri Territory for it to apply as state free. Under the old Northwest Ordinance, under the Articles of Confederation, when 60,000 people move into a territory, it can apply for statehood, okay? So enough people have moved west into Missouri to do that. But the problem is, look at Missouri's location. It's neither truly south or north, okay? So many slaveholders went there and brought slaves with them, but also many people that didn't own slaves went there. So the question is, will Missouri be introduced to the Union as a free state or a slave state? And you can see the quotation here by Thomas Jefferson. But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. So Thomas Jefferson is still alive at this time. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. Thomas Jefferson saw the writing on the wall. He basically is predicting a civil war over the slavery issue, correct? Because that was his response to the Missouri Compromise. There was a major dispute over whether Missouri should be added as a free or a slave state. And the problem was that in Congress, there was an exact even number of states between free and slave. And if we allow Missouri in one way or the other, it could off balance. And that means that one side or the other could have more of a say in passing laws. Okay. Remember that by 1820, many of the states in the North have already outlawed slavery on their own by state constitution, right? Whereas in the South, they haven't done that. So Missouri, which is in the middle, this could throw off the entire balance of the situation. Things get inflamed. Things get heated. The debates in Congress are nasty, right? Which way should it go? And finally, kind of a Band-Aid solution is arrived at that Thomas Jefferson is referring to here, known as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Missouri will be added to the Union as a slave state, okay? Maine, up here, which had long been looking to separate from Massachusetts, will be added to the nation as a free state. So both Maine and Missouri are going to come in, thus keeping the balance of power between slave and free states. Notice that African Americans don't really have a say in any of this. This is all white people making these decisions. And now we're going to maintain the balance. All right. But what about the future, which is what Thomas Jefferson hints at here? He hints at a geographical line. Well, what's he talking about? He's talking about the border of Missouri. Okay. All right. I don't feel like I need to put the whiteboard on here. Just listen to me. The border of Missouri, if you take a look at the map here, is 36 degrees 30 latitude. Congress makes the decision during the Missouri Compromise that in the future, any territory added to the north of that line, 36 degree 30, will be free territory, off limits to slaves. Anything added to the United States below that line will be slave territory. It'll be territory that will be open to slavery. And so 3630 becomes a geographic dividing line. And I'm going to tell you, it is a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid on a gaping arterial wound that's spurting that we refer to as slavery, right? The Constitution recognized slavery in its original form. So now, because it's legal, let the ramblings over it begin, because both sides now are like, should it grow? Should it be restricted? Blah, 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 right? Nationalism or sexualism, grasshoppers? Think about it. Guys like John C. Calhoun, who I've taught you about, are going to be in favor of the slavery side of things. This is where Henry Clay starts arguing union. We cannot allow this to tear us apart. Therefore, Henry Clay is instrumental in getting this compromise done to prevent the country falling apart over the slavery issue already in 1820, okay? Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser because there will be several times during this era of good feelings period that he tries to keep both sides together and beyond the era of good feelings. That's why Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser. He's behind a lot. He throws his political weight behind a lot of these compromises that are designed to give concessions to both sides so the country doesn't come apart, right? We're 40 years away from a civil war at this point. But right now, it's already, these issues are raising their heads, especially over slavery, okay? And then last but not least, the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, okay? So one of the last things that James Monroe is going to do is he's going to give a statement to Congress and thus the world that in the future, when it comes to the Americas, North and South America, that this is our turf and it is off limits to European colonizers. Like no other European country can come over to the Americas and grab a piece of it for themselves. We are basically like dogs marking their territory. We're peeing into the sand, right? Like this is our turf. Nobody else can get a piece of it, right? You might ask yourself, like, why is America so bold in making such a statement with such a small and ineffective military? And we do. We have a small and ineffective military at this time that includes Army and Navy. So how can we enforce the Monroe Doctrine? We can't. The simple answer is we can't. We make this bold statement, but the reality is it's toothless. The nice thing for us is we do state that any European power that we do recognize that any other European power that already has colonies over here can keep them. Like, so for example, if the British have colonies in like, the Caribbean, like in the Gulf of Mexico, the Bahamas, blah, blah, blah. And they're already patrolling that territory with their warships. So we don't even have to bother. All we're saying is, Britain, you're not allowed to take any more territory, right? And so we don't have to have a strong Navy because Britain's just kind of doing the job for us in the Caribbean anyway, the Gulf of Mexico, down here, right? And so we don't have to enforce this statement yet. And we're not going to have to enforce it for a long time. But we also know that Russia's snooping along the coastline up here. England's snooping around in Oregon territory from Canada. Spain's still got all this stuff down here. So we don't want any further colonization. This is our turf. We're drawing this line in the sand. We cannot enforce the Monroe Doctrine yet, but it is this moment, right, of rah, rah, go America. Like, we feel strong enough to make a declaration like this. And that feeling stems all the way back from the War of 1812. Hey, if we're good enough to fight England to a standstill, then we're good enough to make declarations like this. And it is important for you to realize that relations between us and England are going to be pretty frosty for decades to come still. We do not look at England as friends yet, all right? So this is a message to everybody, but especially England. No more colonies. This is our turf, okay? We're going to make states out of it, not you, right? So I'm going to end it there for us. Thanks for listening, guys. Take notes on all these. Use those notes to write your journal entry. And remember to keep working on your document-based question, which is due on Friday.